First of all, thank you so much for inviting us today to your office and having the opportunity to interview you for MIT Press. You recently ended your term as foreign minister, where you built diplomatic ties with nations in the face of some of the harshest US economic sanctions under the Trump administration. The UN estimates that nearly 100,000 Venezuelans have died because of US sanctions, and 60% of those deaths actually occurred while Trump was in office and while you were foreign minister. So as we wrap up the first year of Joe Biden's Democratic administration, my question for you is, where do you foresee US relations with the United States heading, since he did campaign on bringing back Obama-era humanitarianism? And do you see a difference between US-Venezuela relations, whether a Democrat or a Republican is in office?
Thank you. It's my honor to receive you here. Well, I think after 22 years of revolution, we have had to deal with President Clinton, President Bush, Obama, Trump, and there are no major differences between them, because it's not a matter of who is in the Oval Office, it's a matter of who really controls the decisions in the United States, and not only the United States. It's about imperialism around the world, the corporations, the lobbies, and all related to that. So we could say that maybe the pressure is less with Biden because he hasn't lifted any sanction, he hasn't waived any sanctions. They are in place, they are harming the people, making a lot of damage against our economy and our society, but he hasn't put in place new sanctions. In the Trump era, this was almost on a daily basis, at least a weekly basis. So it's difficult to foresee what's going to happen with the relations between Venezuela and the United States. But I believe that as long as the US, government, the elite that rules the US doesn't accept and recognize that there are free people in South America, in Latin America, and that we are independent nations and that we are not their backyard and they have to respect us. If that doesn't happen, we are always going to have these tensions and we'll be in a dispute until the people of the United States reach the power, political power, make their own revolution in their terms, in the difficulties of their system. And only then, when the people, the real people of the United States rule themselves, we will have relations of mutual respect.
Self-determination is what will free all people. And today, Alex Saab, who was on a diplomatic mission, was traveling to Iran to secure food aid and fuel aid, again, in the face of economic sanctions that Venezuela faces. And he was stopped, he was detained, and now he is in a Miami jail, facing prosecution for so-called corruption charges. What do you make of this case?
It's a political case. He was the man, the entrepreneur that took risks to help the Venezuelan people. When the state was absolutely sanctioned and paralyzed by the sanctions, Alex, as a man, a businessman of the private sector, made his own relations with businessmen of other nations, including Iran, including Mexico, including many others. And then we had some food coming to Venezuela, we had fuel coming to Venezuela because of him and his team. So he was helping the Venezuelan people, and that's something that the Trump administration couldn't accept because the sanctions were aimed to collapse the Venezuelan economy and to starve the Venezuelan people, to produce a genocide. And one of the factors that avoided that from happening was people like Alex Saab helping, and especially him. No, he was the main character of the private sector helping the Venezuelan people. So that is why he's in a jail. He's kidnapped. There's no basis, a legal basis, for him to be detained. So it's another gesture of the empire trying to take control of everything in our country.
And what other trade relations has Venezuela been able to build, much because of your work during your time as foreign minister, with other countries like Iran, China, and Russia, other countries that are also suffering under US sanctions?
That was the main task that President Chavez, Comandante Chavez, told his team to do in 1999. We had to diversify our economy, and we had to diversify our partners in the world and our friends in the world. The former governments in Venezuela were a colony of the United States. We depended on everything on the United States. So President Chavez made and opened diplomatic, economic, and trade relations with China, with Russia, with Turkey, with countries in Africa, with the Caribbean here. And the conditions were already planned then to face what we had to face in the recent years. So it's not that it was me in the foreign ministry, or it was only President Maduro. We were working because we knew this was going to happen at some point.
And Venezuela is very well known for having the largest oil reserves in all of South America. And under Chavez, that oil was nationalized. With your new position as production minister, you've basically taken on an industry that has suffered dramatically because of the petro warfare against Venezuela. So where do you see this industry going moving forward, and do you see a comeback?
The main objective of the sanctions was to collapse PDVSA, our oil industry, and they had some success. Our oil production from 2 million barrels a day went down to, I don't know, maybe 100,000 barrels a day. Now we've recovered it, but not because of international help or because of the sanctions were lifted, but because we learned, and we learned the lections that the sanctions left, and we had friends in the world, and we have other partners in the world, and we did things that the U.S. didn't even imagine that we could do in order to recover our oil industry. And we, of course, trusted in the working class of PDVSA, and they have done this by themselves. We, as the government, we brought all the spare parts that were needed, all the chemical components that were needed. I can't tell you how, but we did it, because if I tell you, then they would try to also stop this from happening. But it was the working class, the workers of Venezuela, of PDVSA, who really made this miracle happen. So I think our oil industry is going to grow. It's going to be maybe even more important than it was before, because now we know how to do many things by ourselves that we thought we couldn't, and the sanctions helped us in that sense. And of course, we need to diversify our economy, and the oil will be like the most important tool that we have to invest in other sectors of our economy.
While we all know Venezuela to be known for the largest oil reserves, Venezuela also has the largest mineral reserves in all of Latin America. We have here iron ore, aluminum, gold, and other precious metals that many Western corporations would love to get their hands on.
Yes. Well, I believe that, when the Spaniards, the conquerors of our land 200 or 500 years ago, they were looking for a place called El Dorado, the golden. And they went they walked over it several times, and they didn't really realize it was in Venezuela. The British did. You know? That's why we have a dispute, a territorial dispute with Guyana, because our boundary was much more to the east than it is today, because the British drew maps moving the limits of Guyana in order to have control of the sector of Venezuela, the area of Venezuela where the gold, the diamond is. And as you said, we have all this potential, but the industry that were installed, that were set in for these minerals were extractive industries, no? To export not only oil, but also iron and steel, aluminum, and others. And now we're going to we have recovered these industries with a working class, and now we're going to transform it in Venezuela, and we'll have all the revenue of our minerals for our people and not for other governments or other peoples around the world.
I visited some of these factories, or these mining factories, and what really stood out to me when I was there at the iron ore mining factories and the aluminum mining factories was the working class. They really, truly are the ones who are reviving. They're putting the real work to revive and rebuild these mines, to get them up to speed, to get the parts working again, since the sanctions had prevented many of these parts from being imported to get a lot of these machines working. But they were able to do that themselves, the working class. How much is the working class, I should say, is playing a role in these industries?
They are the heart, the body, and the soul of the Venezuelan economy, and especially of these industries. Socialism can only be built with the working class activated in the front line of every single process. And finally, I believe that the Venezuelan working class has reached the awareness, the consciousness of their role in the Venezuelan revolution. And this is also thanks to the sanctions. No? So we must thank the United States. Because I believe that when the workers, when they saw their industries absolutely paralyzed off in 2018, 2019, after the electricity sabotage because of the sanctions, then they knew that any government in the world, maybe not all of them, but most of them, the president of those governments would have decided to privatize or to sell it as scrap metal, all these industries. But what President Maduro did was he told the working class, well, now it's your turn. And they said, we know it, and we'll make it. And we gave them the power, the institutional power, as to be in the management of all these factories, all these industries. And they have made a miracle with consciousness and aware of that it was either them or they were going to disappear. You know? So it's a very interesting process. You witnessed part of it, and they are really under working class control.
I want to change subjects a little bit to the United Kingdom. Britain has seized billions of dollars worth of gold that belongs to Venezuela. And Britain has also vowed to seize Venezuela's oil industry if Juan Guaido takes power in Venezuela. What do you see with the United Kingdom, their role as a partner country with the United States in sabotaging Venezuela? And do you see that gold ever being returned?
You know, we're used to it being in the South America, in the Caribbean. You know, the pirates, no? They were British, and they responded to the crown, to the reign of Great Britain then. So this has happened before. I don't think that gold is ever going to. We're trying to. We're doing our best with the best lawyers and going to a trial that has no sense at all. But we are there because it's our duty to do it. But I really don't think. They've done this to the Africans, to the people in the Caribbean, in South America, to people in Asia. So it's their natural behavior. Those, not the British people, but the British elite is the same. No, they have kings, they have queens, and they have these prime ministers that are under control of the corporation. So we don't have any. We don't expect anything from them.
And I want to talk about Palestine because you have been a staunch, very vocal activist and supporter of Palestinian human rights. And I'm curious to know, how has Venezuela's support for Palestine and speaking up against Israel's human rights abuses against Palestinians, especially under Hugo Chavez and Maduro and your time, how has that affected and influenced relations with Venezuela with other countries?
For Venezuela, the Palestine cause is a national cause and a humanitarian cause. So I'm sure that you have met many people in Venezuela who feel the Palestinian suffering as ours also. And that is something that was already in our cultural awareness, but the Comandante Chavez also made a great he was a great lecturer of this issue of Palestine. So he taught us to love Palestine and to fight for the freedom and the existence of Palestine even more. And President Maduro did as well. If you recall, in 2018, I believe, when the US government, when Trump said that they would open their embassy in Jerusalem, their embassy to Israel, President Maduro traveled from Caracas to Ankara, because President of Turkey had conveyed the Islamic Cooperation Organization there. And there was President Maduro sitting, traveling I don't know how many thousand miles to defend the sovereignty of the Palestinian people. This has, of course, some effects. We don't care. Morocco, for instance, because of the Sahrawi or because of other causes, has bad relations with us. Israel, because of Palestine, we don't care about it. It's a fair cause. It's a humanitarian issue, and we will defend Palestine in every circumstance.
And Palestinians appreciate that. As I walk through the streets of Venezuela and Caracas, and people ask me, where am I originally from? I will say Palestina, and they lift their fist in support of Palestine, and they give me a big hug. So there's no doubt that here in Venezuela, there's a lot of support for Palestinian human rights. Whereas when you walk through the streets of America, most people don't even know where Palestine is on a map.
Once and he was not Palestinian, he was Arab, a fellow, and he asked me, I wasn't yet foreign minister. He asked me, do you know who is the most important leader in the Arab world today? Especially because he defends the Palestinian cause with his heart. I'm talking 2011 to 2012. And I said, well, Arafat had passed away, so I said, well, I'm not sure who's the most important Arab leader today. And he said, Hugo Chavez. We feel him as a Palestinian, as an Arab, and we admire him a lot. So that's our heritage, and we'll defend Palestine always.
Elections have just wrapped up here, the regional elections in Venezuela. And the White House is, now releasing a statement that these are illegitimate. Juan Guaido is on Twitter calling the elections illegitimate. Juan Guaido is the unelected leader of Venezuela.
His party had candidates
registered. I was just about to ask, what can you say about opposition figures and their role in the elections? I mean, is it true that they don't have representation?
No, I don't know how many municipalities they won, but more than 100, no? Out of 335, maybe more than 150. And the states, no, the governors, they won only 3, maybe 4, I don't know. They're still waiting for some results, but out of 24. But they had candidates. No? They had enough time. They campaigned, no? They developed their electoral campaign without any disturbance at all. They went where they wanted to go. They spoke where and with whom they wanted to, and they presented their offer to the Venezuelan electorate, and the Venezuelan people supported the Chavismo. No? So that's a fact. There were conditions were the same for all. What I believe is that the same happens with the governments of the United States, with the opposition here. They have not recognized that Chavismo exists. It's a movement. It's a historical movement and a process. The Bolivarian Revolution is a historical process. We exist. So they try to ignore what is in front of their eyes, and that's why they continuously fail. And they are going from defeat to defeat, defeat after defeat, because they don't the opposition, part of the opposition that has matured, that has accepted reality, they took part and they have recognized the results, no? And they have accepted the results already. There's another opposition which is, I must say, it's absurd, it's ridiculous, it's crazy opposition that will always insist on that we are usurpers, and that because they believe that they are destined by the providence, by God, to rule Venezuela, no? And that we, the people, maybe not me, but the color of the skin of President Maduro, of President Chavez, of most of the Chavista leaders, no? There's African Venezuelans, mulattoes, no? Where there's people that come from the humble, no? From the poorness, and it's the majority. Who rules in a democracy? The elites or the majorities? If it's a democracy, the majorities. So they have to accept it, but we still have to deal with them some more time until they accept it.
Right. Let me just ask you one more question about South American unity. That was one of the major passionate projects of Hugo Chavez, is to unite all of South America and cleanse itself, of Western imperialism. Yet the United States is extremely aggressive in the region. One of its staunchest allies is Colombia, which we refer to and can be described as the Israel of South America. Where do you see South American unity heading towards?
As President Maduro always says, we are a continent in dispute, Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's not a new struggle. It is at least 200 years old. No? The Monroe Doctrine was issued in 1823. And the Battle of Ayacucho in Peru that liberated most of South America was in 1824. So this was already happening. No? This confrontation of visions was happening 200 years ago, and it's still happening now. I think President Chavez did a great job in order to, in some cases, resuscitate the need of the Latin American Union, and we made gigantic advances in the first 15 years of this century. But then again, the elite in the United States, when they saw what was happening, they said, hey, wait a moment, this is my backyard. They cannot unite. They have to be under my control. I have to control the governments, the military, their economies. So let's promote some coups. Let's promote some regime change policies. Let's fund the candidates from the right in most of the countries, because this cannot happen. But I believe that maybe in 10 or 15 years, that dream of Simón Bolívar is going to be a reality, and most of Latin America and the Caribbean are going to be united forever.
And how does the Organization of American States play a role in ensuring, these right-wing governments are propped up and they're aligned with, U.S. and Western imperialism?
It's part of the dispute. The OAS is the arm of the Monroe Doctrine in order to stop the integration processes, to avoid them from happening. And CELAC, in the other hand, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, is the arm of the peoples and even of the societies, even these private sectors that are aware that we have to work together in order to have some voice in the globalization process that is in place. So it's a dispute. It's not going to be easy. Many battles are to come, but I'm sure that we will prevail.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.